One Piece Chapter 1083, titled The Truth About That Day, features a cover page request of Doflamingo taking care of a fallen chick, and even using his coat as a substitute nest for it. Now this may not seem like much, but when the information of this chapter first started leaking out, the mention of Doflamingo alone was enough to get a ton of fans excited. Conversations about Doflamingo joining Cross Guild started to boil over. And despite my skepticism when it comes to early discussions like this, the thought of my two favorite One Piece characters, Buggy and Doflamingo, being on the same crew was really exciting. Although it's just a cover request, it's interesting to see Doflamingo displaying a level of kindness to such a vulnerable creature. In fact, we saw something very similar from Crocodile with a previous cover page where he helped out a pug in the rain. Let me know if you think this is a sign of things to come or just a silly image. Picking up where the last chapter left off, we'd find ourselves in the Kamabaka Queendom with the Revolutionary Army. While meeting with Dragon and Eva, Sabo would inform the two that they'd accomplished everything they intended to during the reverie. They successfully completed 3 primary objectives. 1. They destroyed the Celestial Dragon symbol, officially declaring war on them. 2. They managed to rescue Kuma along with as many slaves as they possibly could. And 3. They succeeded in finding and destroying the Holy Land's food reserves. With this, Sabo would question what the fallout was like. According to Eva, it was pretty serious, but ultimately, they managed to get the world's attention, and the Marines ended up sending in the big guns. Dragon would chime in that they started simultaneous uprisings in 12 nations where the revolution held strong influence. But unfortunately, a third of them were unsuccessful, from which point Eva would express that although 8 of them worked out, one of them happened to be Lulusia Kingdom, the island that disappeared. The world government managed to censor the truth about everything, but the remaining 7 nations declared that they would no longer pay the Celestial tribute or agree to be exploited for their resources. Eva would add that all over the world, the Revolutionary Army was attacking world government supply carriers in an effort to stop resources from reaching the Holy Land. Mary Joa's high elevation is said to make it an impenetrable fortress. But with a wrathful expression, Eva was dying to see how they'd fare while living under siege, being forced to live in poverty and go hungry like so many others in the world below them. And Eva, being as eccentric as ever, was all too pleased by the idea. Dragon would agree that although they may not be able to completely stop their imports, they'll be able to continue squeezing them slowly but surely. In fact, the Celestial Dragons were probably struggling already. But here's where things get intense. Dragon would make it clear that the world government isn't an enemy that'll just take this sort of punishment. The real fight begins when they mobilize what are known as God's Knights, a group of at least 9 figures of considerable strength. At this point, One Piece has no shortage of imposing groups, and for the world's worst criminal to pay heed to them in such a way is very telling. What terrifies me is the fact that these guys have seemingly been absent for the entire story thus far. So what sort of insanity would warrant their involvement? Also, the foremost silhouette here looks unsettlingly similar to our old buddy Shanks. And given the fact that he so casually met with the 5 elders during the reverie, it's hard to deny the possibility entirely. Mind you, silhouettes in One Piece are hardly accurate, especially if the character explaining it is unfamiliar with the figures themselves. Clearly, Dragon is very in the know about all this stuff, but although Yosaku specifically mentioned Jinbei early into the series, the accompanying visuals were very off, especially Luffy's rendition, so it's probably too soon to jump to any major conclusions. But if this is in fact Shanks or even just a clone of him or something, since those are a thing, Dragon better hope that he can punch as hard as his daddy Garp. Power scaling for these guys will be very interesting. One more thing to note here would be the swirl pattern around them. It's the same sort of thing we saw from the members of CP9, Kaku, and Khalifa when they first ate their devil fruits. So we might be dealing with some scary abilities very soon. And by very soon, I mean a few months at least. It's One Piece after all. Eva would then let it be known that Sabo was bound to be their priority target, then quickly correcting to playfully call him by his newfound moniker, the Flame Emperor, a name that Sabo wasn't exactly a fan of. From Dragon's outlook, the truth behind the assassination of King Cobra didn't matter. Either way, the news reports made Sabo a hero. He'd begin pouring out drinks as he explained that in the eyes of revolutionaries across the globe, authority figures of the world government are hated as inhumane monsters. And while he's sure that there are many rulers that fit the description and deserve to be punished, there are also a number of smart and fair rulers out there too. But King Cobra of Alabasta was in a league all his own, a man considered to be an exceptional king. But sadly, misinformation is quicker to spread than those sorts of nuances. Despite possibly coming off as cold, although Sabo felt bad for King Cobra, he felt as though he could live with how things turned out if it helped to fuel the flames of rebellion. Even Dragon was astounded by Sabo's unwavering resolve. Meanwhile, Eva, like a lot of us, really just wanted to know what happened at the reverie. A newspaper photograph would then be shown of King Cobra dead on the ground with Sabo to the side of him. Eva and all the others apparently shed tears over it as they tried their best to think of an explanation, all because they wanted to believe in their friend. And as this was said, Dragon solemnly continued his drink. Sabo's expression was focused but difficult to read as he overlooked the paper. As finally we would flash back to over a month ago at Mary Joa, not long after the reverie started. The revolutionaries had begun their attack. Several celestial dragons could be seen running for their lives as they demanded to be saved. And unfortunately for them, their storehouse had been completely destroyed by the then identified to be Revolutionary Army's 4 commanders. These hideous rulers were stunned to see not only their symbol destroyed, but their premium food as well. Something they could only perceive as jealousy from inferior creatures. Like a rat demolishing your kitchen because you refuse to share. At this point, the Celestials didn't even want to keep their enemies' heads as trophies and just wanted them to be completely eliminated. An ugly female Celestial would then demand that all their bodyguards be rounded up and executed afterwards for letting this happen in the first place, which wasn't exactly an inspiring rallying cry for those still serving them. We would then see a rodent-faced Celestial Dragon atop an enslaved pirate as he whipped and demanded a faster pace, wondering what the man would do if anything were to happen to him. But the pirate was at his limit. Unsatisfied, the Celestial would decide to walk on his own, but not before pulling a pistol on the slave as a means of firing him. But before he could, the weapon was snatched by a flying assailant as the slave hit the ground. The Celestial was shocked to have lost his weapon and would express his frustration towards his mysterious assailant. This was Karasu, commander of the North Army, who'd give us a glimpse of his Delphoid abilities as he made use of a crow made of soot, which is a substance very rarely used as a power in fiction. So it's pretty cool to see. Karasu would actually use this crow as a means of communication, telling the enslaved pirate to go to the east side of the city. Several Cypherpole agents would suddenly appear and begin to riddle Karasu with bullets. This ratty Celestial would then be identified to be Saint Plumbing, who demanded that they shoot the invader until nothing remained. And much to their surprise, there really was nothing left of him. But they would soon come to the realization that they were probably dealing with a Logia user here. Karasu's soot would then waft through the air in the form of dark feathers and slide past their feet, allowing him to reform behind them. And using the power of his soot fruit, completely annihilated this group of agents. But notice how he simply disarmed the Celestial rather than taking him out. It would seem that even at a time like this, the revolutionaries had their reservations against directly harming a Celestial Dragon. While this was happening, Lindbergh was busy blasting away at the chains of several slaves with some sort of laser, and he also told them to head to the east side of the city so that they could get them out of the Holy Land. They'd all begin to thank him emotionally, but he'd tell them to save it for when they're free. As he hovered in the air, Lindbergh couldn't help but notice how active things seemed to be elsewhere. From which point, one of Karasu's crows would warn him that some heat was headed his way soon, so he needed to pick up the pace and free everyone. Lindbergh would agree as Karasu prepared himself against Admiral Fujitora, then launching his attack, Crow Renkon, towards the gravity user. At the same time, Western Commander Morley was making use of his push-push abilities against Admiral Ryokugu. Morley would point out how their adversaries like to play rough, much to the Admiral's frustration as these guys were the ones destroying the city. From which point, he would demand to know where Sabo was. But in his own way, Morley would tell him not to worry about that. Despite being defended, the nearby Celestials weren't exactly pleased by the kaiju battle playing out above them, as they'd be quick to reprimand Ryokugu, even threatening to have him executed if any of them were to get hurt, which was certainly a difficult predicament for the youngest admiral. Fujitora would be questioned as he looked to be preparing an attack of his own. Apparently, he was in the process of calling in a meteor, which was quickly dismissed to be a terrible idea. Despite two admirals being on the scene, considering they were in Mary Joa, despite having the power to shift just about any battle in their favor, these two were severely limited in what they could unleash. From which point, we would see the many former members of CP9. Bluno would then say that despite the handicap, the revolutionaries were doing an impressive job against the admirals. Karasu would then contact Sabo over Transponder Snail, wondering if he'd gotten a hold of the explosive collar keys just yet. Sabo hadn't, but it wouldn't be much longer since he knew where they were. As he fire-stepped his way forward, he'd contact Lindbergh and let him know that Kuma was in the castle too. He was with Saint Roswald and Charlos. The two seemed to be up to no good and in pursuit of revenge for what previously transpired at the public courtyard. St. Charlos was still intent on enslaving Princess Shirahoshi. As Shirahoshi herself spoke to someone in the palm of her hand, Lindbergh would express his frustration with Kuma's fate. Sabo would reassure his friend that they would have their retribution before telling Morley to ensure that everything was ready to go, which he would agree to. At the same time, Jewelry Bonnie was in a rush with her father in mind. Elsewhere, Princess Vivi would tell Rob Lucci to leave her alone as she'd much rather be assisted by Vice Admiral Garp. Lucci would seek to reassure her by promising her safety, but would be left speechless when Vivi mentioned how he failed to do so with Princess Shirahoshi. And she was rightfully convinced that her new friend would be targeted again. From there, we would see King Cobra wheel towards a large door with 2 guards situated on each side. They'd then make it clear that only King Cobra was allowed to meet with the 5 elders, much to his attendants' discomfort. After coughing, Cobra would call T'Chaka and Pell and let them know that this meeting wouldn't take very long and advise against them waiting outside, instead suggesting that they spend their time looking after Vivi. Being as troublesome as she is, they couldn't afford to let her out of their sight for even a second. So much is being set up right now, and it feels like we are finally getting to the core of worldly affairs. Really curious what you guys think about all the information in this one, so drop your essays in the comments. And while you wait for more, go ahead and check out some of our other One Piece videos.